and welcome to Film Lovers. I'm Sonia Chung. I'll be talking to people who work in the film industry and who are also avid film lovers. Today, my friend from a previous show, Heindz Donnelly Schmidt, will return and join us. Hello, Heindz. How are you? It's been a long time.
Hi, yeah. We've had a whole pandemic since we last spoke, didn't we?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think was it before Christmas? It must have been before Christmas when we last spoke.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably closer to the middle of last year.
Yeah, I remember you saying that you were really busy during one of the other lockdowns. God knows when it was, the first, second, and the third. So because obviously, just to catch listeners up, what is your profession in the film industry?
Well, I work in post-production as a colorist.
Yes.
So normally a film will go into post-production and go to the editor and into sound. And after all that's done and the edit is in picture lock, then it'll come my way for the color grade, where I'll essentially finish the look of the film
Hmm.
and try and make it look like the picture inside the producer, the director's head,
Yes.
um, before producing the final deliverables for them.
Yeah. So your last episode was basically talking about your job and what it entails and how you got into it. It's basically a bit of a biography, really. So in this episode, we're doing basically a catch-up episode because it's been a long time since we've spoken to each other. So why don't you tell everyone what you've been up to? Because you've been really busy, and I want to know as well.
Yeah, I have. I think the effect of COVID was essentially to prevent all of the production companies out there from actually filming, and they all went into editing what they've got or finishing the films that they've got on the board.
Remember you told us
And
that.
Yeah, so I finished two features that were sent to that were actually sold to a distributor in LA,
Hmm.
um, and they had to go through QC, quality control, before the distributor would essentially then distribute them. So the first one went through, passed, and was released in the USA and Canada. And then also released shortly after that in Spanish-speaking countries because they did a dub and Spanish subtitles. And probably 7 months after that, we finished the second feature, and I believe it's still in QC. It was sent to LA. It went into QC. I'm sure that if anything was wrong with it, we would have heard by now. So it all looks very positive, and not getting any majors or minors back from QC is always a good thing. And yeah, the my client for those two films, he's now finished his next feature, which he shot in 8 days, which is amazing for a feature film.
Yeah.
It's an alternative history feature that he filmed in Manchester, but in 8 days is crazy. So that's going to land on my table anytime within the
Hmm.
next month or two.
Wow.
Um,
But that's
yeah,
that schedule must have been crazy if it's only 8 days, because especially for a feature film. I mean, you hear about
yeah,
like films that take maybe 3 weeks to make, which even for
yeah,
3 weeks is very short for film in general because it's so time consuming and there's so much organization involved in the scheduling of numerous aspects. So like the location, getting the actors on, if they can't come one day, then they have to come another day, etc. So there's
yeah,
so much
yeah.
involved. But how they managed to do that in 8 days, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
I think the thing that helped is a lot of the main characters would have been in his previous features, so he's already worked with them, so he knows them. Um,
Mm,
and some of the other talent I know. There's a actor that has starred in Game of Thrones previously, so he's quite professional. So working with people that are professional and you can rely on that just makes the
Mm,
job so much easier.
yeah.
Um, so I think that contributed a lot to it, and he's also very efficient. He likes to do everything in camera, very little VFX, and it lends a certain aesthetic to the film, afterwards when it actually hits the screen, which is a good thing. It's very different
Yeah.
from all of the VFX heavy stuff you see on screen these days.
Mm.
Not that I'm complaining. I'm a colorist. I get given
You
VFX
get
and
paid.
footage, and yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, no, but you're
um,
not the person who's in charge of doing all the like CGI effects, for instance.
no,
That's
no,
that's
no.
what.
I have great respect for those guys that can do that level of VFX.
Time
That's quite a
consuming,
skill.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Must be very time consuming. Um, what else have you been up to? I remember you telling me that you've written a screenplay, and that's very exciting.
I did, and I am. So, there was a competition online, for a 5-page short, which,
Mm.
if anybody's ever written a screenplay, you know that 5 pages, that's not a lot of space to tell a story.
No.
Um, you struggle doing it in 15 for a standard size short, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that was part of the challenge. So I've submitted that. I've not heard anything back yet, but fingers crossed. And then I'm working on another one, which is it's a screenplay that I started writing in the middle of COVID because I realized that if I wanted to get it made, it would have to be minimal locations, minimal cast, just to make it possible. But because of the colors work,
Yeah.
and the work picking up so much, I never finished it. But I've still got the script, and I'm still working on finishing it. And I've got a company in Preston that are interested in a script like that to produce. So yeah, that if they like the story, then fingers crossed they
Yeah,
might
for
actually
sure.
produce.
How did you find writing it? Because I mean, it's so difficult just to write normal dialogue. Do you know what I mean? It sounds easy, but you're thinking, well, depending on how many people are, how many characters you have in a film. I mean, it's hard enough to sort of try and think of dialogue for one or two people, let alone. Oh, and I know you said you got a minimum
Mm.
amount of cast, but it's just generally, I think people struggle to find that character's voice and to be able to write them. So for you, did you write maybe one character first and then do the story outline of that person and then maybe come back to it, or just do all one big go? Because that's a lot to do, isn't it? I mean, I know
Yeah,
it's
it's.
difficult.
I think there's. I did a lot of research into structure,
Hmm.
screenplay structure or story structure, and also the important elements in a story. For instance, at the beginning of a story, you want to have the viewer care about your protagonist. If you don't care for the protagonist, you're not going to care what happens to them, and then the
Hmm.
rest of the film is just going to fall flat because you don't care if this person gets killed or doesn't get
Yeah, yeah.
their lover or whatever. So I did a lot of research in that, and then I wrote the structure of the film first before I started with any dialogue or action.
Good idea. Yeah.
Um, I took the story and said, well, I know that this is going to happen to this character, and I want this to be the end result, and this is how it's going to change them because that internal
Hmm.
change has to happen at the end of
Cause
the
and
story.
effect. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that that's the bit that was really difficult to fit into 5 pages. How do you change
Yeah,
a person's
so
personality or
quickly.
their flaws so quickly?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you only
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, basically, for anyone who doesn't know, the way a normal film structure is set out is it's like a book. There's a narrative, isn't there? There's a
Mm.
beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And usually, in most circumstances, there's cause and effect. So, like you said, this happens to a person as a result of this, etc. And
Yeah.
that's usually how a film structure is panned out. So it's the narrative and cause and effect.
Yeah.
But then obviously there have been examples of mise en scène, which is all included in, you must know them because you're
Yeah.
color graders. Mise
Yeah.
en scène means basically everything that's within the frame. So it's
Yeah.
everything you see basically, like colors, etc. It goes on from, lighting, the actors, etc., etc. There's so much involved in what you see, so within the
Yeah.
frame. Um, so it's a lot to take on, isn't it? I mean, there are examples of films that obviously go completely against the normal, and they'll do the narrative all over the place. So you like, for instance, Tarantino. Um, there's numerous examples of directors who've done it, where they might start at the beginning and go into the middle and then come back to the end. Start at the end, sorry,
Yeah.
flash into the middle, and so it varies, which is probably twice as hard. Coming up with the normal structure. I mean, you'd really have to
Yeah.
work out exactly, what's what. And a good example of that is Memento, by
Yeah.
what's his name? I can't remember.
Oh,
The
yeah.
English director who did Inception, and
Nolan.
my
Christopher Nolan.
brain is, yeah, Christopher Nolan. Thank you. So yeah, so I mean that's also very challenging. But for you to do that in 5 pages is remarkable. So
Yeah. It essentially gives you 1 page for the act 1, 2.5 pages for the second act, and then page and a half for the third act, and finishing off the
yeah,
film.
yeah.
Which,
That's
yeah, it's not
how
easy.
long did it take you? How long did it take you to do, say, the first draft? Did you do it in one big go, or did you have to do
No,
several drafts? How long did they take you to do?
so I did a first draft essentially just to get the structure in place, and then I sort of I broke up every act into first act into 2 halves, the second act into 4 halves, and the third act into 2 halves. And then I just focused on those little sections, those little bits, and what needs to happen within them to drive the
Mm.
story forward. How long did it take me? Well, I started. Uh, started in January, I think it was,
Mm.
and the submission was a month ago. So it took quite a while. I didn't have a lot of time to spend on it because of the color grading work.
Mm.
But I did go on holiday at the end of July, and we went to a small town on the coast of Ireland, and I every morning I would drop my son off at the surf school, and he'd go and enjoy himself, and I'd go and find myself a small little pub with with a sofa in the corner, and go and sit down and just write, and just having that headspace every morning for an hour and a half for 2 weeks. I think that's essentially where the bulk of the work got done.
Yeah.
Finished the first draft and then went over it again for the rewrite, making sure that, because after the first draft I think it was 8 pages. So
Yeah.
for the
Quite a
rewrite
lot.
I then went and just cleaned it up and everything, took out everything that wasn't necessary, and got it into just 5 pages. I think I actually had to change some of the words so that I don't kick over into the 6th page. It was that tight.
Oh gosh.
And then, of course, with the title page, that's 6 pages anyway. But I don't think they'll have an issue with the title page
No,
being extra.
no.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really need the discipline to write something like that, don't you? So in a way, it was it was a good thing that you did it, during the holiday. And
Yeah.
then, like you said, you
Yeah.
had your time where every morning after you dropped your son off at surf school or whatever, you made sure that the allocated time from this time to this time, where I'm going to sit down
Yeah.
and really focus on this peace and quiet,
Yeah.
which is what you do because you're alone with
Uh,
your
And in
thoughts.
my research, I found that most writers do that.
Mm.
A lot of them will get up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they
Oh,
will
really?
sit down before the kids wake up, and they will, spend an hour and a half writing, and then go and have, do whatever else for the rest of the day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's just their time. That's when novelists finish their books.
Yeah, yeah.
um, Yeah,
That's
but at the beginning of the year, I took on a short film grade, which was a tricky project, and that took up most of my time. It's a high budget short film. I think it's something like 150K or something like that. Budget. I don't know the precise number, but they had two colorists and a post-production house grade the film, and the client wasn't happy with the previous work. So he approached me and said, listen, I want you to have a look at the previous grade, and I want you to honestly tell me, can you do it better? And if you can give me an indication of how you would do it better, then we can move forward with this. But I've had two colorists and a production company try their hand at this film, which was very well shot, but it was a tricky grade, and he wasn't happy with their work. So I did my normal thing where I said, well, number one, what do you want the film to look like? There's a website that I use called Shot Deck, and it essentially just has stills from Hollywood films, like thousands and thousands of stills from Hollywood films.
Wow.
And you can go on there and you can search by time of day and colors and whatever to get the shots that most closely resemble what you're looking for. So we did that, and we just sort of built a look. And then I took some of the shots from his film, and I said, right, I'm gonna work on just these 5 or 6 shots, and I'm gonna apply this look, and then I'm gonna throw it at you, and you tell me whether you like it or not. And we did that, and he said the feedback was just great. He said, this is far better than what he's seen previously. So I got the job, which was great. And I graded the film, and then we went into a post house in Sheffield, where there's essentially a room that's darkened out, and it's got a projector and projects the film like you would see it in theater. And it was just me and him for half a day, and we just went through the whole film, finishing off the look. And he can see what it's going to look like in cinemas. So after that, he was happy with the result, and yeah, I haven't seen it released yet. I know it's going to festivals, and he's trying to get into the big ones, Venice and Cannes, and that kind of thing. So I'm excited to see where it ends up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a tricky project, and I can see why the other colorists sort of fell down on it, because what you generally do with a film is you apply one look over the entire film.
Okay.
And then you go in and you change the scenes to sort of match and fit that look.
Yeah.
That didn't work with this one because this film essentially played off in modern times and the 1960s and the 1100s. There were three time
Oh,
periods, and
right.
those three time periods each had a different look to them,
Mm.
and they kept flashing back. So I applied the look to the 1100s. I applied a different look to the 1960s, and I applied a different look to the modern ones. So they were three distinct looks. They weren't one overall. But then
Mm.
those three also had to, gel together, so
Yeah,
your eye
yeah,
isn't jarred when it goes between them. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, tricky project, and that kept me
Yeah,
busy for most of the
I can understand. And
beginning of the
also,
year.
yeah, for sure. And also, it's for the audience, isn't it? So they can easily differentiate what period is what.
Yeah,
So I can
yeah,
imagine that that would have been very hard. I mean, that's part of mise en scène again, isn't it? It's like a continuity process, really. So you want to make sure one period is basically like one color, like you said, or style, and then the brain's logic will say, oh, okay, so this is this period, and then catch on
yeah,
as to
yeah, yeah,
what period what, because that would be hard.
yeah.
You need
And
to
and
know
wh-
that. It's hard
and
to
what made it
track.
even more tricky was at the end of the film there was a montage section where it keeps cutting between the time periods.
Oh, gross.
Um,
That would have been
so
really.
yeah, so when you go from modern to 1100, 1950 to modern to 1100, if those looks are very different, it's going to be like like a club and strobe lights in your eyes. You can't
Yeah.
have that difference. So they have to gel, but they have to be different enough.
Yes, but
Yeah,
then also you'd really need to be on guard as to if it's flashing constantly. You'd really need to be on the ball, wouldn't you? So it's
yeah,
not only going from one scene from this time period to another. If you've got a whole montage where it's going from this one to this one to this, you really need to kind of keep track of the structure exactly. So
yeah,
this is da, 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 this is in this color, da, 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 da,
yeah.
and you really need to be on the ball. So you can't sort of have a moment where you just like, oh. Do you think that's without getting them in trouble? Do you think that's maybe what happened with the other colorists, or they really struggled to in the end to come out with the final product? That's probably what happened.
Yeah, I think so. Within the software, there is the ability to group shots. So I think they would have probably grouped. Well, uh, yeah, I think they probably would have grouped the shots that belong to the same time period. Saying that, um, I've now seen work done on a feature which I'm doing now, and it's also a regrade. I've been brought on a senior colorist because the previous colorist also worked on it, and I'm now basically redoing the work.
Mm.
Um, and on that project, I basically had access to the original project, and I could see that that colorist wasn't using groups. So while I'm saying that, I assume that any colorist would probably use groups to group time periods. I'm not that sure because this this
Yeah.
this feature I'm working on now, there's no groups, and groupings is basically how you keep all of that together, and you make sure that
Mm.
shots from a scene look the same all through the film. Um, so yeah,
It's
uh,
a challenge.
we all have our different ways of working, and I'm not saying that the way that another colorist works is wrong.
No,
I
no,
just I just have
everyone
my
has a unique way of doing it, and I
yeah
guess it's like anything, isn't it? Sometimes things work out and some don't. So, what your perception of what somebody else wants, even though you think it's the same, it's very hard to sort of be on the same page in the end, if you know what I
yeah
mean. So it's
yeah
basically it's like say teaching, for instance. Sometimes some students don't get a certain teacher. There's a personality difference or whatever. So it's generally life, really, isn't it? So But they found you and you saved them.
Yeah, it seems that this year is a year for regrades. It's basically taking films that have a problem and trying to fix them and because that was a short at the beginning of the year, and then this one I was just talking about is the one I'm working on now. And I've actually just finished. I'm just waiting for the sound to come through. And it's a feature film, and the client has the distributors knocking on his door going, "Where's our film? We want to distribute this thing." Um,
More
and
stress on the filmmakers.
so it's already been sold, and I think it's already been sold to been sold to the distributor, but I think that this distributor already has a deal on it for one of the streaming platforms or whatever. Yeah. So the pressure is coming down the chain. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we spoke about this, didn't we? Like, there's, we often assume that the filmmaker, the director is the boss, but no, not really. There's like, there's everyone above him, or her, him or her. There's the distribution people, then you got the studio people, and it's just like, I don't know how anyone in that profession manages to stay sane.
Yeah.
You do hear stories, don't you, about how stressful it is. You've not only got to deal with your organization of the film and etc. You've got all these other people on your case, and you're just like,
it is not a glamorous industry. People think it's a glamorous industry. It is hard work.
It's not something you'd be. I think I asked you this time. It wouldn't be something that's of interest to you to be a filmmaker or director.
No. I would. I essentially will stay on either side of the pipeline. So either in post-production as the colorist or right at the beginning as the writer, and I hand off the script and
that's it.
Yeah, you guys go make it.
Yeah. I'm done. You ever get my friend Tom, who's also a screenwriter, was saying that sometimes, because I asked him, would you ever, after you submitted your final draft, would you ever maybe get people from above saying, well, this wouldn't work out as much, so couldn't you change this bit? And has that, and he said very rarely that happens, but sometimes that could happen. Has that happened to you, or do you know of anyone else that's happened to?
I know I know that very rarely is the script that you finish the one that gets filmed. So on set there's quite often reasons why certain scenes can't be shot or will be shot differently or whatever. So that's quite normal. If you are writing on spec or you're writing, to deliver to a production company, then yes, they will quite often ask you to change parts of the script, and they'll have reasons for that. They might have production timeline problems, or a specific location that they can't get, or a character that makes it impossible, or there's political reasons. It could be one of a million things why they would want you to change parts of the script. And sometimes they'll just come back and say, the story's great, but it's not 100% right for the current market. Can you change the protagonist from a male to a female, or something like that? And I think it's important for the writer not to be precious. If you're precious about the script, then you really need to just go out and get the funding and make it yourself.
Yeah.
Because then you feel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I did ask him. That must be very frustrating. You've spent all this time and work, and then to have someone come back to you and say, "Well, you know, we got to change this because of this, or this because of
Yeah,
this."
yeah,
Um, it's bound to happen, like you said. You know, sometimes you can't get a location on the correct day, etc. It just, you know, and things happen, don't they? It's
yeah,
basically the whole process of filmmaking
yeah,
is basically problem solving, really. Like
yeah,
you're that's exactly what you do as well. You know, you're trying to figure out how to get from, you know, one structure to another structure, for instance, for this very complicated film that you've just told us about,
yeah,
that's set in numerous, you know, periods. So you're like, well, this isn't working, so what can I do to change it, etc. So it's my I'm how do you say it? I bow down to you, so hats off to you.
yeah. So when it comes to writers being precious about their scripts, and either taking or not taking feedback from a production company or whomever to change their script, it's of course important for them to, you know, decide whether the person asking them to change their script is somebody that should be believed or not, or you know, whether it should be taken seriously. Sometimes depending on who the client is, you might go, yeah, you know, I'll change it however because I really want to sell the script and have the film made. But there are times when, you know, we write from personal experience, and we write stories that reflect some part of who we are. So there are times when a story is too close to home and you really don't want to change it because it'll completely change the meaning of it or the experience of it, or
Or the pace of the story.
yeah, or the pace of the story, or you know, suck the life out of it just to
Yeah,
make it
yeah,
more entertaining. Yeah.
yeah.
um,
So, yeah, I mean, would you do it again? Do you think write another screenplay? Is that sort of
I'm
appeals to you?
actually busy writing. Yes.
Oh yes, right, so carried on. So you
Yeah,
are
I've
filled as well, hopefully.
well, the problem now is that because I don't have a 5 page restriction, I've sort of gone crazy, and I've got two scripts that I'm writing at the same time. I don't know if that's if that's the done thing. If you're supposed to be writing two at
Okay.
once, yeah.
Because
But
you focus on one first and wait till that's done and then go on to the next. Because
well,
you'll end up having characters from the other one going to unless you want to do like a crossover, you could do that, couldn't you? That could be the third
yeah,
one.
well, the reason for the two is, one is my pragmatic head saying, write a story that you could possibly make, you know, in terms of locations and budget and that kind of
Sure.
thing. And the other story is, no, actually, this is just a story I want to tell. So this thing is huge, and it's probably like millions of pounds, and you know, feature size, and the story actually happens on another planet, and it's a load of sci-fi, and so it'll probably never get made, but I'm writing it anyway.
Well, all you can do is try, you know, and
Yeah,
see, you know, how
yeah,
it goes. It sounds like you've been super busy then, and that you're really
yeah.
enjoying the new venture going off into script writing, screenwriting even. Is there a difference between script writing and screenwriting, or is it exactly the same?
I think the only difference would be you could also write a script for a theater play, and
Yeah.
that wouldn't really be screenwriting. It would be
No, it's
more
a
a script.
writing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
it's just basically saying what's what, really. So a script could be a radio script, for
yeah,
instance, in a radio
yeah,
play or theatre play.
yeah,
So it's just basically um, making it obvious, really. So screen is for the screen. Yeah, radio is for
yeah.
the radio. Okay.
And then off of the back of a screenplay, you also get a shooting script, which is essentially the DP's script for the movie. You know, with their planning on how they're going to film the thing and how the blocking's going to work and whatever.
Yeah.
And then you would have the manuscripts, which is everything stripped out that the actors don't need to know, and that's their manuscript that they study and hopefully know by the time they get to the set.
Yeah, but then there have been numerous cases of, I mean, I was talking to my friend in the last episode we did of villains, where for instance the filmmakers involved, or the filmmaker, will deliberately not tell the actor absolutely everything. I guess because it kind of, it's a real reaction from that
Yeah,
character, that person character. Because we were talking about the example of the usual suspects, Kaiser Soze. So there was a bit of beef apparently between Pete Gabriel. We're talking about Gabriel Byrne, sorry, and the director, because at one point he was confused because he was like, "Well, I'm not Kaiser Soze, well, otherwise I wouldn't be pointing the gun at myself," which was red herring. But then there was another point when he went off so angry because he was kind of, giving the impression that actually maybe he is Kaiser Soze, when he found out that actually he isn't Kaiser Soze, and he's like, "No, but I am Kaiser Soze."
Yeah.
So in a weird way, I guess that he said, my friend Tom, was that a lot of directors do that because they don't want the actor playing it knowing this will happen subconsciously, if that makes sense. So in a way, it's a bit more. But there have been, numerous cases like that, like Blair Witch Project. They did lots of weird stuff to them and didn't tell them exactly what's going to happen. So
I guess it depends on the film and also the director. I know David Fincher, he's extremely exacting, and the actors need to hit their mark and do it. He's done something like 87 takes on a film, and you can imagine doing the same thing. 87
well, I know
times.
Kubrick was notorious for doing stuff like that, but it would be like even more. And I remember saying to someone who's a filmmaker, if you ever made me do that, I'd go absolutely crazy and soar. I think it was something like well over, maybe one time, maybe 200. Can you imagine doing the same thing over and over again? It's like, I can't think of possibly anything else I can do to make this one different or to give something new to it. My brain, and you get tired, obviously. It's very exhausting. But I had no idea that Fincher is very exacting. What he wants, where he wants. I mean, I know
one of the worst. Yeah.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Because I mean, he's an amazing filmmaker. I mean, I know from interviews that people who work Tarantino, was like, he very rarely lets the actors improvise because he's done all the work for you. He's written everything, and he wants everything exactly like that. I mean, there have been times, I think, when sometimes, I guess, maybe there might change slight gist, but I think it very rarely happens. So I think some filmmakers, they prefer to have all the work set out for you, and the actor just learns the lines and goes there and delivers, the best that they can with so many takes. I know Kubrick was like this, but then you get ones that are a lot more experimental, and they might change as they go along, and I think, oh, actually, this doesn't work really well for this scene in the end. Sometimes it happens. So
a lot more flexible.
Yeah, everyone's different. I remember seeing a making of The Shining, and this is interesting to point out to you because you're also going to screenwriting and done some writing yourself, where it was very common for them to so they have, obviously the overall script, but then they'll go in the next day and there'll be like a yellow script all of a sudden. So it's changed. He's typed it up. I was like, no, so the pink script is no longer in use, and he'll give a yellow script to everyone. So the poor actors, they think they've learned everything. No, they're going to do all of that. They have to see what else. So there was always different color per the script
Color of
that
the
he
day.
color of the day. Can you imagine how unsettling that would be? I mean,
Wow.
you've got first there's a difference between improvise, but for you to all of a sudden be like, next day go in.
Yeah.
With, like you said, with an idea, the DP says, right, we're doing this scene, so make sure you prepare for it, blah 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 blah. So
Yeah.
you're done, you're ready, and then I mean, there's always a choice to improvise, obviously, as you're going along. But to have someone say, well, no, that script is gone. Now we got a yellow one, and it's like, I
Yeah.
didn't get a yellow one. I've still
It
got the
makes it
pink one.
it makes it really hard to work with them. And I've also seen behind the scenes of Wes Anderson. He's also extremely exacting because the
Really?
blocking has to be absolutely perfect,
Mm.
because he's got that style with symmetry and everything being,
Yeah, I remember talking
yeah.
about that.
And then on the other hand, you have Chloe Zhao. She made Nomadland, and on
That's
that
brilliant.
it's extremely flexible and there's lots of
Mm.
room for improvisation. So, and on with both of them, they are at the top of their game, but their styles are completely different.
Yeah. And with Nomad's Land, I mean, I saw a bit of it. I never got to finish it, so I have to carry on, maybe watch it from the beginning. But you can tell that she's got that kind of sort of sense of experimental filmmaking. She's happy to just go, because the way she's framed it, it's so like vast. There's just, you see
Yeah,
lots of vast shots of where she is. And sometimes it's just pure silence, and maybe like there's a shot of her. Absolutely naked, but it's like peaceful. It's not in a sexual way.
yeah,
One at nature, but it's just like
yeah,
it's things that you wouldn't really call necessary for. But it is in her case, because that's what she is. She's like a traveling person, really. So I think everyone's different. Is it maybe? I guess perhaps with some filmmakers, do you think be happy to make a transition from, or I guess after a while they're so used to working a certain way that, for instance, Fincher wouldn't be comfortable doing something like being a bit more kind of free flowing and experimental.
no, I did. I don't think it would be
Not after
possible
so
for
much
him
time.
to do that. Anybody that is that OCD probably would
Is he
find it
really that OCD? I didn't
extremely
realise.
annoying. Yeah, yeah. What I have
Maybe.
seen with the filmmakers is, the people that I've worked with is a lot of them are wanting to take their films back to the way the films were made, late 70s, 80s. In that era, in terms of the look, sometimes they'll say that they want the film to look like the films that were shot in those periods, and then when I actually showed them a look like that applied on their film, they're like, "Ooh, that's a bit too much. Let's walk it back to how I
Mm.
saw it in camera." There's always that. I've got this picture in my head, and then I've got this picture as I saw it on camera as we were filming it, and there's always like a sort of a middle road
Match up.
between those two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but there's been quite a lot of harkening back to the old days of it being shot on film, and that's not just for filmmakers over here. It's Hollywood as well. What film was it? There was a film that was made recently where they used a film intermediate. They essentially filmed that entire film on digital, on probably Arri Alexa. But then the digital was projected onto actual film celluloid. That film is then, the negative is then developed, it's transferred to a positive, and the
It's the
positive is then
reverse.
yeah, and the positive film is then scanned and taken
Uh,
back to a digital format, because that film applies a aesthetic to the digital image that the digital image doesn't
wouldn't be able to
fully
capture.
get.
Mm.
Otherwise, yeah. I can't remember if it's Tenet or if it's a different film,
That's
but
really interesting.
yeah, it's
Because
also
usually,
very expensive.
I can imagine, especially it's going from it's going from digital, which is like the modern way of making films and everything, to all of a sudden going back to the old days of making film. Whereas, like you said, now we get a lot of these old films that are digitally mastered to
Yeah.
be able to see it, within home access, for instance. So you can kind of understand that actually that wouldn't be as maybe as time consuming as doing the reverse order and as expensive because it's the common practice now. So that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing that they were able to do that. And I imagine a lot harder to come across the like the technology and equipment to do that now.
Yeah, there's only a few uh, places. The exact terminology for the labs that do that escapes me now, but there's one in London, and then there's one. I think there's one in New York and one in LA. There might be more, but the main ones that I know about, um, that still that will do the film intermediate specifically on IMAX. The large diameter film,
Oh yeah.
yeah, not 35 mil film,
Mm.
and they have huge, massive, you know,
Screen.
well, that, and also facilities to be able to project those frames onto the film and then to develop the film, and all of that happens in extremely well controlled environment. Because the thing with film, and anybody who knows film development, I still develop film at home, is it has to be the temperature of your developer has to be the constant, and you have to make sure that your chemicals are fresh. If your chemicals age, then you essentially the development process gets less effective. So it's a very technical process, and it might have been the Batman, actually. The latest Batman film.
With Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, it might have been that. I'm not 100%
Wow,
sure.
so quick
I've
as
watched
well.
I've watched so many films of late that yeah, I
Lose
have
track.
to. It's my job.
Yeah, of
uh,
course.
yeah,
It's a good job to have, though. I mean, it's like it's endless, isn't it? There's so many amazing films out there. I've
yeah,
just thought of another example, like 'cause we're discussing, for instance, when you were saying, this film that we think is the Batman, but the latest Batman has done the reverse. So it's gone from, digitally edited into being mastered. Mastered, is that the right word for analog? So it was celluloid, sorry, which was
yeah,
the original old days way of making
yeah, yeah.
film. Wasn't the celluloid film, before I go on to what I was going to say, wasn't the celluloid film highly flammable, or is that me? Because I've been watching, because there's a bit in Inglourious Bastards where they say, what was it made of? The old film, like that kind of negative. Was that
Um, I
was that
don't think
highly
that.
flammable or not?
No, I don't think the original films were highly flammable. I know that if you ran your end result, your positive, through a projector, and it is essentially stopped on a frame, then you'd burn through the frame where it stopped on, because the actual light bulb that projects through the positive, like in the cinema,
Mm,
um, that light beam is extremely hot. So as long as the film's running, then it's okay, because it doesn't
okay,
that part of the film doesn't heat up.
sure.
I don't know if there was a film stock that was flammable at some stage, or if it
I was
was
just
in
wondering
the
if it was Inglourious
development
Basterds,
process.
exactly. Where
Yeah,
they said there's a
I
scene where
don't know.
she her and her partner torch up the cinema and they come up with
Right.
a light up all the old films, that they have, like, so there's a bit where Samuel Jackson narrates that. So I wasn't sure if that, if that actually was the case where the old film might have been, easily kind of so
Well,
maybe it's just that
I'm
film.
sure it will burn if you set it alight. The
Yeah,
film would burn.
but
Oh
you really
yeah,
can't do that, would you?
yeah,
Really, not
yeah.
unless you're
No,
doing a film.
so the old process used to be, and they still do. They still film on film, like the
Mm,
actual capturing process, on set is done to film. Um, but this one that I was talking about is essentially where they capture it on set on digital, and then they transfer it to film, and then they go from film back to digital again. So that's why they call it a intermediate, because it's in the middle of the process, and very cost
yeah.
prohibitive, and it's it's not something that anybody in that's not working at the top of the budgetary
Yeah,
levels
yeah,
would be
yeah.
able to
Want to
do.
really do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but sure. So what I was the point I was going to make, because we were talking about all these crossovers, etc. So like earlier we were discussing how maybe like you were saying maybe a director on a day might say, well, actually I wrote it with this in my mind, but actually on the day when I think actually this would work, so they'll change it. But then when you think about it, I mean, there have been cases with like old films, like you said, well, not old films, but like that old, but where they'll have like the latest edition of the director's cut, maybe 10 years later, for instance. You know what I mean? And you
yeah,
can kind of understand that as a person anyway, because we're always generally growing and changing. So your perception of the way you wanted it to look like when you were making it would
yeah,
potentially be different from the person you are now,
yeah.
several many years later. Is that very common as well? Would that sometimes happen?
Yeah. Um,
Or very rarely?
I think that it essentially every film production, or most film productions that I know of, at the time of making is always a rush to get it finished and get it within budget. Um, there's never any, sit back and relax and just do everything that you want to put everything that you want into this film.
Mm.
It's always the opposite. There's always, we're late, we're over budget, we essentially just have to abandon this thing now and work with what we have.
Okay.
So I think whenever a director or a filmmaker has the luxury of going back and saying, "Well, I'm actually going to reshoot or re-edit or remaster this film, um, or do a director's cut." We all know about the uh, what's that?
The Exorcist has been done several times, hasn't it? Like,
Exorcist, but also the one that made the most waves was Justice League with what's his name?
that
Uh,
did. No?
no, Justice League is the whole Superman.
Oh, sorry.
It's a DC film with Superman and Wonder Woman and
Okay.
everything. But there was the Joss Whedon original, and
Hmm.
then they did that one didn't really do very well in box office, and then it was redone by God.
Another person.
What's his name? I'll tell you in a sec. I can actually
Okay,
look
don't
that up.
worry. But then at the same time, that's a different filmmaker, isn't it? It's not the same one as the original.
Snyder. What's his name? Zack Snyder. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
So Zack Snyder essentially redid the Justice League. Some of it was redone, was filmed,
Hmm.
but he completely changed the look of it. He completely changed the aspect ratio because he believed that if you have a very wide aspect ratio, that fits better if your movie is it shows scenes like the old westerns where it's a big
Mm.
landscape.
Yeah, yeah.
But he said he's going to change the aspect ratio because you want to show these people, these superheroes. You want to show how tall they are. So you don't want such a wide aspect ratio, because if you want to show a tall person in a wide aspect ratio, they end up being really small in the frame.
Yeah.
Whereas if your aspect ratio is taller, then they just look big.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's probably the most modern and example that got the most uh, that hit the news and got hit the headlines. The Zack
Yeah.
Snyder cut, and it's also far longer than the first cut, and a lot more epic.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
if you haven't seen it, then you should really watch the first one and then watch the second one, because you really do get the appreciation for that
Second one.
second version. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same
Might not
time,
be everybody's taste, but
no. But at the same time, you don't want to lose kind of the novelty and the originality of the first one, even though it didn't do very well. Do you know what I mean? Because
yeah,
I mean, it must be on some level some kind of a film nerds or film students, love after so many years, or okay, one of those cult classics is that he felt like he could remake it. Does that make sense? Or it was just something he fancied doing in his own version?
yeah. I think what happened was he was Zack Snyder was started to actually make the film, and then there was internal politics or whatever, and they decided
Okay.
that they were going to give it to Joss Whedon, and then that fell flat. It didn't do good, and that didn't do well in the box office, and I don't know how that happened, but then they went back to Zack Snyder and said, we'd like to redo this your way, and have your cut. Which on that scale, for that level of budget movie, I don't think it ever has been done, because it must be extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Taking a gamble on putting a movie that didn't do well and just putting a new
Yeah.
cut of it out there, it's like, wow. But it really worked, because
Yeah.
that cut of his really made waves, and I did think it did really well in the box office. And Zack Snyder has actually gone on. He made a feature film with his iPhone, and it did really well. So he already had some kudos, behind him, and he's made other films as well.
Yeah.
He's very well known filmmaker. But yeah, I've not personally done grades on recuts or anything. I don't think I work in films that have the budget for that kind of thing yet. But uh, and I think I really like the space that I'm working in at the moment, because
Mm.
all the filmmakers that I work with are extremely passionate about the films that they've made. Um,
Which you need to be.
Yeah, but I think if you move into the Hollywood level, the really big budget things, it's more about the money in the box office than it is about the actual story.
Yeah. We spoke about this,
Um,
didn't we? We were saying how
yeah,
actually it just becomes like a money making machine, and
yeah,
it kind of takes the emphasis away from the actual film project, which should be artistic and inspiring. It kind of like,
yeah, and
it's
that
all
even
that.
impacts on the writers, because
Yeah.
um, Hollywood is not looking for spec scripts. Then Netflix isn't looking for spec scripts. They essentially want you to come to them with a script that's already got an audience attached. So if there's a Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, if there's a book that already has a following, and you come to them saying, I've got the rights to make this the movie from this book or whatever else is already has a following with it, then they've
Yeah.
already got a customer base.
Yeah.
Or if you say, I'm going to do a sequel or a prequel, we've seen many of those in the last few years, sequels
Yeah.
and prequels, of a film that already has a big following, then all of the
Yeah.
cinematic universe,
Yeah.
etc.
No, I mean, I remember talking about this perhaps with you and other people, that it's kind of like the safe bet, really. So,
Hmm.
like you said, if people, if that does well at the box office, and even if it's a massive Hollywood film, which to be honest, I'm not really a big fan of, all that stuff, especially the Marvel films, personally. But um, then you're going to carry on making those films because like you said, you got a core audience. So basically, they're kind of they're playing it safe, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's a risk for them. Yeah,
yeah, whereas, like you said, if they took on something that's completely like an unknown filmmaker, a low budget film, that's a big risk because one, you don't know how people are going to respond to it. You don't know if it's going to make the budget back, that it's the money back.
yeah,
And that's a big thing, and it's kind of like, well, a bit like the chicken and the egg scenario. I mean, people will carry on if they carry on watching these films going, then there'll be another Mission Impossible 241 or
yeah.
Terminator. It just becomes a franchise, and after a while, the franchise kind of loses its kind of like,
Fizzles out. Yeah,
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 like the first one. There've been cases where the first and second are potentially the most memorable and the best ones because it was original and unique at the time. Then you're just basically repeating the same thing over and over again in the same formula, and it does kind of get like a bit
well,
repetitive.
that's essentially what's happening with Marvel at the moment.
Yeah, that's
With
why
this
I can't
late,
stand. So I don't like to know what's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to know. Um, predict. You want to be surprised, and you want to
yeah, yeah,
come out of the film thinking or feeling a certain way. And if you know exactly what's going to happen, not what's going to happen, but who these people are already, and there's only so much you can really do with them
yeah,
after a certain period of films or time. You know what I mean? You're going to repeat the same thing, like Freddy's killing more people, and then it's getting a bit boring, so we'll make it into a musical when it gets down to
yeah.
number six or whatever.
And what Marvel's doing now with the whole She-Hulk and Marvel's owned by Disney, and what Disney's now doing with all of the every character in Star Wars is getting their own series. Like
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um,
Like on Kenobi on
yeah,
Disney.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's just like leave it as it is.
yeah. I've been steering away from that. Last night I was watching a movie called Melancholia. It came out in 2011. It's quite old, but it has a 8-minute long slow-mo intro that doesn't get boring. You can imagine like 8 minutes of slow-mo, but it's like it's the last few moments before the end of the world in slow-mo. And I started watching it and I found it really fascinating. I thought, this is not the kind of thing you see in movies anymore. Everything has to
No,
be fast-paced and,
shame,
and
isn't it?
yeah,
Because that's what made going to the cinema so exciting. Especially, I mean, I've spoken about this with other people, who've guest starred on the show, but that, like, for instance, the maybe like the early 2000s and everything, especially the 90s, and the 90s was very eclectic. I find there was what you could call a few more low budget quote films. I mean, they weren't, but in comparison, they look like anyone could have made it.
yeah,
For now, that would get made. Do you know what I mean?
no, yeah,
It would get
yeah,
made, but it wouldn't be shown in cinema anymore. It'd be
major
shown
cinemas or on Netflix or anything.
on,
Yeah,
yeah. Most probably Netflix. I mean, I did say and talk to someone about it, and I was saying how, like, I think we spoke about this as well. How, like, the streaming channels tend to be a bit more independent and go for, sort of what would be maybe considered a low budget film, and then they decided to split it up into
yeah,
episodes,
yeah.
make it
And
more
they just make a
adaptable.
series out of it, and they can milk it more.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. To make it more adaptable, I guess, because it's reaching the audience at home, whoever wants to watch it at home. but it's kind of like I don't know if it's say like a catch-22. You know, it's a bit of a vicious circle. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting. But what before we wrap it up, because you were talking about how, for instance, if a film gets
Mastered or
remade or rebooted by another filmmaker, then from the original, then you do have cases where it's happened and it's been absolutely goddamn awful. Do you know what I mean?
oh yeah,
It's very offensive to the original one. I mean, there have
yeah,
been many cases of that, but I won't say the name of the film. But you know what I mean. So there's also a case of that too, where a remake or a reboot.
well, there's
Remake has gone.
there's an example that's very close to my heart, and the original Highlander film with Christopher Lambert. They said that they want to remake Highlander with Henry Cavill, and I was just like, no, you cannot remake the original. It is impossible. I don't care who you put in it. No,
it's not gonna. Yeah. But there's many cases. It's like, leave it alone. You know.
Yeah. Make new stories. Give us new stories, essentially. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, so I won't get started on it, but I remember watching the West Side Story remake by Steven Spielberg,
right.
And I mean that got mixed reviews, didn't it? Because there were some people, some filmmakers, some what do you call it, film reviewers that loved it, and then some that didn't. And it just didn't do anything for me. And I'm also you also try not to think with a biased mind as well, which is hard, I think. If you love the original, like you said, you're gonna have to try really hard not to think about it as like, oh, this is taking a piss out of the original kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? It's its own thing. So it's just like, just make your own film, Hollywood. Stop remaking. You know, think of something original. Which is a shame, really. But yeah, it's just
it is what it is. It's a business.
It is what it is. Yeah, exactly. It's, you know, if the money comes in, then you'll keep making it, won't you? It's like anything else.
Yeah.
Any normal business, for instance, if they're making the money, then they'll carry on, you know, selling this thing or this product. So it's a bit of it's like a money making, never ending vicious circle in a way. So it's a shame, but it's life. But it's been lovely talking to you, Heindz. It's been really interesting.
Cool, yeah.
You're welcome to come back anytime. And if you want to do, you can do another catch up if you want, or if you want to do like a special or whatever. I think you remember saying, you saying that you wanted to do something. I think it was cinematography or something last time. So yeah, anytime you want to come back, feel free to come back.
Okay, cool stuff. I will do.
All right, thank you. It's been lovely talking to you. Anything you want to say before you sign off?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it there then. All right, well, thanks, Heindz, so much.
Thank you.
And come back anytime you want.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.